Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. For the EPS Alumni Speaker Series, I'm gonna hand things over to Claudia Triana, who's gonna get us started. But before I do that, I just will also drop in a moment a link to a website that you can go to get educational resources on Indigenous items related to land acknowledgement that you see there.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for making time of your busy day to join us here. I get the great honor and great pleasure to introduce our illustrious alumna, Dr. Mercy Agyepong. Dr. Agyepong is an assistant professor in the Sociology of Education program in the Department of Applied Statistics, Social Science and Humanities at NYU. Her scholarship draws from critical social theory, sociology of education, sociology of race and ethnicity, sociology of immigration, urban education, postcolonial theory, African diaspora studies, and anti-Blackness studies. Born in Accra, Ghana, and raised in the Bronx, New York, she's particularly interested in the racialization and treatment of Black students in U.S. public schools, with a specific focus on the school experiences and academic achievements of sub-Saharan African students in urban public schools. Her research has been funded by the AERA Division G, and she is a recipient of the 2021 NYU Steinhardt Racial Justice Award, the 2022 NYU Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Faculty Award, and the 2022 NYU Steinhardt Diversity Innovation Grant Award. We're so thrilled to have you here today, Mercy. And for the folks here in the audience, Mercy has requested that this be a conversation that's geared by your questions. So please, please, please either drop them in the chat or open up the mic and let us know what your thoughts are. And with that, I'll hand it over.
Thank you very much, Claudia. Hello, everyone. I see some familiar faces, so if I know you, it's great seeing you. If this is my first time meeting you, nice meeting you. As Claudia stated, my name is Mercy Agyepong, and I'm currently an assistant professor in the Sociology of Education program at NYU Steinhardt. Before we get to your questions, I do want to just tell you a little bit more about who I am, hear a little bit more about how I got to where I am, and then we will get into your questions. I want to make sure that this 1 hour that we have together is really useful to you, and this is why I want it to be more of an, I would say, a discussion or engagement between you and me and y'all, as opposed to me just talking about things I think you might want to know, right? So as Claudia stated earlier, I was born in Ghana, and even though I think of myself as a public school kid, I actually didn't go to public school, so I migrated to the United States in 1997, 2 weeks shy of my 11th birthday. Prior to that, I was a private school kid. I went to a school called St. Anthony Prep School, which is also based in Accra. It's about 30-minute drive from my home. And, you know, as I was getting ready for today, I was thinking about what I thought about and how I felt about my time in that school and just about schools in general. And I realized that I just, in general, never really cared about school. I don't think I truly, and it's not hard, but it's, I think it's a little confusing for people to hear that because of my academic trajectory, which I'll talk more about as we go on. But I noticed that I just personally didn't really care for school. I enjoyed going to school because of the social aspect of school, right? I really loved to see my friends, love engaging with them, but I never really cared about the content of what I was learning. I just went to school because that's what you do, and also because I get to see my friends. And then, so I migrated here in 1997 into the Bronx specifically, and attended Bronx public schools for middle school and for high school. And it was really the same during those times as well, in terms of how I felt about school. I went to school because it was what you do. But what I enjoyed about school was that I get to meet people, and it's always been really a social space for me. And it really wasn't until, and I think because I went to school for the social aspect of school and not really for the academic aspect of it, I really learned how to do school. I learned how to do school in the sense that I know that I wanted to be in the school context, right? So I knew the type of things I had to do to make sure that I didn't get into trouble, that I didn't get kicked out. So, you know, I was always a good student in the sense that I wasn't causing trouble, but I wasn't a high achieving student in terms of grade. I was really pretty average in terms of, I was actually taking a look at my transcript a week ago, and I realized that my GPA was really average, but I noticed that teachers always thought really highly of me just because I wasn't being disruptive and I wasn't really interrupting classes and stuff like that. And I noticed that, my apologies. And I realized that really took me far. Just being a good student, knowing how to just be a good student really took me far. And this got me into to undergrad. I went to SUNY Geneseo for undergrad, which is about 5.5 hours away from New York City. It's also a public school. And again, once again, I went in as an accounting major purely because I told myself I wanted to make money. And I thought that's how you make money in America, right? Doing something related to business. And then I quickly realized that accounting wasn't what I wanted to do in my life after taking macro and microeconomics and realizing that wasn't really it for me. It was very difficult for me to narrow in on what I wanted to major in because once again, I think my thinking around school at that time was always about just interacting with people and not about what learning the content that you're supposed to be in school for. So I ended up graduating with a 2.16 GPA, which to me, I mean, I know that's really low, but I think to me it was more about, oh, I went to college and I need to complete college. And that was really it. I wasn't thinking about, I need a college degree to get a job, right? And it's not that I didn't know you needed a college degree to get a job, but going through that time, it just wasn't something I was thinking about. I thought all that matters was that I will go to school and get a degree, which was really praised in and outside of my family without them even really paying attention to what my GPA looked like, because they were more concerned about the fact that I'm graduating. And so I graduated, and this is when I finally realized that I have gone through school for 21 years and haven't actually learned anything, right? I realized I didn't know anything when I graduated undergrad. I also graduated in 2008, which was during the recession. And so the reason why I came to this realization was because I couldn't get a job. Right? I couldn't get a job, and I was trying to figure out why I couldn't get a job while my other colleagues were getting jobs. And it's because they all graduated with above 3.5 GPAs. They all already knew what it was they wanted to do. They had a plan in place for them, something that I was lacking for many reasons. One of them being, well, for many reasons, I'll leave it as that. We could talk more about that when we get into our conversation. So during that time, I started working for a nonprofit organization in New York City. It is an educational nonprofit organization that is geared toward recruiting fifth and sixth grade high school, middle school students, or elementary into middle school students who are really high achieving in their schools, and helping these students get into boarding schools for middle school and high school, and also to top tier universities, Ivy League schools, so on and so forth. While working in this particular nonprofit organization, this is when I realized that I wanted to go into education. I would say that I stayed away from education. I've never had an interest in going to education because my thought process behind it was that there was no money in education, right? And I'm not going to lie. One of my main goals in life is to not be poor. Being poor sucks. It sucks that I have money. And so that's always been my goal. And so when I was thinking about ultimately what I want to do in the future, whatever it would be, it would have to be something that we as society privileged, and that specifically came with a high salary, let's say. And so, but while I was working at this particular organization and listening to the way that those in their organization that I was working with, the way that they were talking about these students that they were working with and about the families, I knew that I didn't like the way they were talking about the kids. And these kids were low income Black and brown kids. I think it was every year they brought in about 100 kids, and there would be like maybe one or two who weren't Black or Latinx, right? And so working in this space and hearing the way that these all white, predominantly women identifying staff members would talk about these students was very difficult for me to hear. And I knew that it didn't sit well to me, but I didn't have the language to really explain it to myself and or explain it to them as to why I thought the way that they were talking about the kids was really problematic, and the way that they were talking about the kids' parents and their backgrounds were pretty really problematic. So I think for me, that pushed me to want to understand more of what was happening in that space. I couldn't understand how a space that was supposed to benefit Black and Brown low-income students, I couldn't understand how a space such as that will employ folks who didn't understand the students that they were supposed to be helping, and who really had extremely negative perceptions about these students that they're supposed to be helping. One way of me attempting to figure all of this out was to go to graduate school. I decided to then apply to graduate school, and I wanted to stay in New York City. So I applied to NYU, I applied to Columbia. And you might ask yourself, how is she applying to NYU and Columbia with a 2.16 GPA, right? Realistically, a lot of people will be deterred from actually applying to these schools. But I did so because I don't think that my GPA equates my intelligence. I think, my GPA was based on the circumstances within which I was in at that time. And I knew that. I was very aware of that. I didn't feel that I was incapable of doing graduate school because my GPA was low. I just thought I would need more work compared to my other people who perhaps graduated from more elite schools with higher GPAs and so on, and knew what they wanted to do ahead of time. But before I applied to NYU, I actually called NYU and I asked, I got a chance to speak to Dr. Lisa Stuber, who was a professor in the Sociology of Education program here. And I was very upfront with her, and I told her that, I'm interested in this. I told her the reason why I wanted to be part of this particular program. And I told her that I was calling because I have a 2.1 GPA and I wanted to know what she thought about it. If she thought it was worth me actually applying, or if I should just, put that application somewhere else. And one of the thing that she told me that really stood out to me and still stands out to me every time I think about applying to new jobs, trying new things, was, well, if you don't apply, then that's an automatic no. And if you apply, you don't get in, that's also a no, but at least you know that you applied and there's a 50% chance that you might get in, right? So you're not losing anything by putting in an application. And in your application, maybe you should submit a statement that kind of explain why you think you got this GPA in undergrad and what you're trying to do to kind of push past that. So I did that and ultimately got accepted to the Sociology of Education master's program at NYU. I finished this program and got into Howard University for a PhD in anthropology, a PhD in sociology, but ended up having to withdraw my acceptance because of lack of funding, right? And I hope that we get a chance to talk about funding today, because of lack of funding. Because PhDs are quite long, and it would be very difficult to go into a school that doesn't actually guarantee funding to some degree. I also already had, going to get a master's degree from NYU, it wasn't funded. So I had to come out of pocket, and I also had to take out student loans. So I already knew I had loans and didn't want to take out a lot anymore. So I had to decline that admissions. I ended up getting a second master's degree, and it's a master's of science and education from the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. It was a 1-year program. It's usually about 1.5 to 2 years, but I did it in 1 year because I knew that I wanted to go apply for a PhD programs the following year. So I went there. I loved the school, but particularly love Philly. If you haven't been to Philly, you should definitely go visit it. It's an amazing city. So I went to Penn. While I was at Penn, I applied to a couple of other schools for PhD. Very long story short, I ended up here at UW-Madison in the educational policy studies program, working with Dr. Lynn Posey Maddox, who I see here today. I keep looking at you, but you can't tell that I'm looking at you. Hi, Lynn. So I came to EPS, and while in EPS, I focused on really sociology of race. I've always been quite fascinated about race in America. And I think that is rooted in the fact that I am a Black immigrant, and the way that the role that race played in my identity formation from the age of 11 to now has been very, very interesting to me. And so I think through that, it pushed me to then want to study it, to see how race, how perceptions of race, but particularly perceptions about Blackness shape students' experiences within schools. So I went to UW-Madison, got my PhD in 2019, and I'm happy to talk more about that experience when we get to more of the Q&A. I am currently in the social ed program at NYU, which is the program that I got my master's in. So it's almost like going back home, right? Going back to New York, which I love. Going back to a program that I understand, but I understand as a student, right? I didn't understand it as a faculty. So that was a whole other ball game that I had to learn. I've been here for 3 years. This is my 4th year now. Since I've been here, it's been quite interesting for me because COVID hit my first year. So it kind of interrupted a few things, specifically my research. So I do research. I'm interested in research in schools, specifically ethnographic research. And that was actually, that had to be put on hold during the pandemic. But I did still engage in other types of research. I conducted 3 different types of research since I've been here. One was a follow-up of my dissertation research. The second one is a study that looks at the school experiences, that looks at the impact of COVID-19 on African immigrant youth, home and school experiences here in New York City. And the third one looks at college knowledge among African high school students. I actually just finished the last 2 a month ago, and I'm still writing and analyzing it as we speak. So that's what I've been doing in terms of research. And in addition to that, I am currently working on a book manuscript. I'm happy to say that my book project is under review by a really prestigious press. I can't say nothing until I get a contract, so I can actually announce that. So I'm really, really excited about that. And I'm happy to talk about that process as well. What else am I doing? I think I see that it's 12:20 where y'all at. So I'm gonna stop talking now and taking any questions that you have.
Well, as folks warm up and start generating questions, I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about what exactly your dissertation research was, and how has that project evolved now that you're in a tenure track position? Like, how has that changed from a grad student to your role now?
Sure. So my dissertation research was a critical ethnographic research at 2 New York City public schools, specifically located in the Bronx, where I was looking at how perceptions of Blackness and Africanness shape the school experience and academic achievement of West African immigrant students in these 2 particular high schools. What has changed now, once I was done with my research was conducted in 2020, 2016, 2017. And then I analyzed it and wrote and defended it in 2019. When I got this job, one of the things that I wanted to do, I would say I knew that I wanted to write a book as part of my tenure package, right? So I came in knowing that. I knew that I wanted to go the book route instead of the article route because of the type of research that I do. And so, and in addition to that, I knew that I knew that for my book, I wanted to do a follow-up on my participants. When I started in 2019, and it had been about almost 3 years since 2 years since I started, 3 years since I started my research, but 2 years since I completed it. And so in 2020, when it had been the 4th academic year since I started my research, I ended up doing a follow-up interview with my participants because I wanted to really understand, one, how they were feeling about the elections. This is because I started, my first day of data collection was the day after election in 2016, right? And so I have a lot of data on that specifically. So, and then in 2020, there was another election cycle happening. So I did the follow-up, really wanted to hear more about that, how my students were feeling about that. But I also wanted to know whether my participants' views about Blackness and Africanness have shifted now that they were no longer in high school. So most of my participants were juniors and seniors, and at the time of the follow-up, they were all post-high school, right? Some of them were in college, some of them were working, and some of them were doing other things. So I wanted to know if perceptions about race have changed. And so it was very interesting to the follow-up was, I think I'm writing it up right now. So as I'm answering the question, I'm thinking about what I'm writing in the book. But the book ends with the follow-up study and really comparing their experiences from 2016 with how their experiences now as it relates to their Blackness is quite fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.
That's wonderful. I see in the chat, there's a question from Gray Beatty, and they're asking if you could speak more about your experience being faculty compared to a graduate student and how your responsibilities have shifted.
Oh, yes, of course. So you definitely have more time as a graduate student than you do as a tenure track faculty. I think in terms of experiences, it's quite similar. And this is something that I talk to my friends about. I think being a graduate student and being on tenure track, for me, experiences have been quite similar in the sense that you're still required to, produce in the sense of writing, right? Writing and doing research is one of the main things of being a graduate student. And you still have to do that as faculty, as tenure track faculty. Another thing that I think is very similar is the fact that when you're in graduate school, you're building up your CV, so you need publications, you need research, but you also need service, right? So you should be, as a graduate student, you should be engaging in some kind of service. This is similar to what you have to do when you're a tenure track professor. Let me make sure I'm answering if you could speak more about your experience being faculty compared to. Okay, and how okay, I want to get to how your responsibilities shifted. So in terms of responsibilities, as I stated earlier, they're actually quite similar, except that I feel like, to me, it's more high stake now, right? Because particularly being on tenure track, because it's not guaranteed, right? Tenure track is not guaranteed. The responsibilities they've shifted in terms, they've definitely shifted. And I feel like I'm just repeating myself. They've shifted in terms of the stake that you have to then to deal with. One of the things that I think one of the difference that I've seen in my experiences as a graduate student and as a tenure track professor that I think I'm still kind of teasing out is a sense of community. So when I was in graduate school, when I was in EPS, I felt like I had a large group of people who really made sure that I was always on top of my game, even when I wasn't, people that I could always engage with personally, academically, so on and so forth. And I think that's very hard to form on tenure track because because of all the responsibilities that you do have deal with while you're in tenure track, you're so focused on making sure that you're hitting all your points and you're dotting all your I's and crossing all your T's. I think sometimes the building that interpersonal connections kind of lacks a little bit because you're so focused on making sure that you're doing all the things that you could kind of cross out. And also, I would say that I think institutions, and I could only speak for NYU because I don't know any other institution in this way. Institutions don't do a great job at cultivating a relationship with other colleagues that is not only around your work, right? So yeah, you will meet people and you will talk, but the conversation will always be about, oh, so what research are you doing? Oh, let's talk about your funding. What did you get? So on and so forth. And then that's it. It doesn't often go past those kind of engagements. So I think, to me personally, that's the one thing that I'm still working on, being in a space where social connections doesn't go past your research and your funding and so on and so forth. I see Dr. Bard. Okay, go ahead. I was just
gonna go, I saw I missed some, and I see Emily asked, what advice do you have for PhD students who are honing their research interests and dissertation ideas?
Great question, Emily. So one, if you know what you want to do, be adamant about keeping what you want to do, right? I think one of the things I've seen as a graduate student and also as a tenure track professor are students, graduate students who come into the program, know what they want to do. Of course, things shifts after many years of being in graduate school, but finally decide that this is what I want to do, and then talking to people, getting certain feedback, and then changing what they want to do, right? Or changing the topic that they want to approach just because of what other people are saying about it. If this is a particular topic that you know that you want to do, you shouldn't be deterred from doing it, right? I think it's easy to be deterred if you're hearing from, let's say, advisors and senior colleagues about your project maybe not being good enough or not being strong enough, right? If that's the case, I think it's more about learning how to explain your project to people in ways that perhaps they could understand, but not necessarily you going and changing your ideas. I've seen people change their ideas because of what other people think about those ideas, and ultimately really just doing a project to please other people as opposed to sticking to their guns and doing the project that they know that they wanted to do. While I'm saying all of this, I also know that it's very difficult to, especially as a graduate student, you're really not entirely confident in what you're doing. You don't even know if what you're doing is how you're supposed to be doing, is what you're supposed to be doing, or how you're supposed to be doing it. So I know it's really, it's easy to give in and, you know, and put whatever ideas you wanted to pursue and take in other people's ideas. But I think that if you know truly that this is something that you want to work on, do not let other people deter you from actually pursuing that specific focus. If you see that happening, I suggest that you go and you talk to your advisor about it. If the person who's deterring you from doing this is your advisor, I think that you, as a graduate student, need to be very honest with them and let them know that this is what you want to do. And whatever reason why your advisor is perhaps pushing you away from the project should be something that is very clearly stated to you, right? But it shouldn't just be something you give up simply because other people might not be interested in what you're doing. Because if that's might not be interested, or because other people haven't done it, right? So they see it as something that's perhaps far-fetched. Yeah. Thank you for that, Emily.
That's really great advice. I also see a couple questions here about the job market. Yes. So generally, any advice that you may have on the academic job search, and more specifically from Antonella, we have, do you have any suggestions for those in crossing fields, disciplines? To what extent is interdisciplinarity valued for academic jobs in particular?
Okay, so I will start with the latter question that you asked. So in my experience, I see, and with the job descriptions that I've seen over the past 3 years, they've been asking for interdisciplinary scholars. Like I've seen a lot of that on job applications. So I think, and I'm going purely based on that, I think those being an interdisciplinary scholar is really valued. Of course, it depends on what field you're in, right? So I mean, I can't say much past that, but it really also depends on what kind of field you're in. If you're coming from education, or let's say specifically you're coming from EPS, right? So even though EPS, you know, it is an education department, right? But within it, we have different concentrations, different discipline of concentrations, right? So when you're coming from programs like that, or departments like that, you can frame yourself in your application as an interdisciplinary scholar. You can because we, you know, I think if courses haven't changed, the courses that I partook in were courses that allowed me to learn not only about how to approach education through a sociological lens, but also through an anthropological lens, a little bit on history, a little bit on philosophy, so on and so forth, right? So I think if you can frame yourself as an interdisciplinary scholar when you're applying to a non-discipline specific job, that's great. I think it's valued from what I've seen on applications. Now, in terms of I think the former question that asks about advice about the academic job market. That's actually quite broad because there's so many different parts of the academic job market. So I see that was Leslie that asked this. Leslie, if you have anything specific that you want me to talk about, I can. Because, you know, with the job market, it's not only about where to find the job listings, right? Because that's where you have to start. So it's not only about where to find the job listings, but also how your cover letter should look, what should go in there, how your diversity statement should look, how your teaching statement should look, right? So if there is anything specific you want me to talk about in those realms, I can.
I didn't have anything specific. This is just a plug. We do have a workshop coming up next week on the academic job search, and that discussion will cover a lot of those topics that Mercy just mentioned. But I was more wondering, like, any top of mind tips for what you remember of your own job search, either about identifying sources or about the process of interviewing, the Zoom interview, the on-campus, any of that. But also, I realize it's a huge question.
Yeah, okay. So not only do I have my experience to talk about in terms of the job market, I've also been on 3 job search committees all in 1 year of last year. So last year was quite a hectic year for me regarding that. One of the things that I cannot stress enough is just being prepared, like being prepared for the job interviews, the actual job interviews. Because, and this, let me use myself as an example. So in the past, when I went to interviews, I just always assumed, well, they're just asking about me. I can just talk about me, like, right? I don't need to prepare to talk about me. I know what I do. I can just, so yeah, I would think about the interviews a bit, but I wouldn't think about it in depth as I did when I went on the job market. Because when I went on the job market, when I got my first, so I made it to the first round for 2 schools. And the first round is the Zoom interview. And for the Zoom interview, I went online and looked for it's only 30 minutes, which really is like 25 to 30 minutes. You talk for about 20 minutes. They ask you if you have questions for them for about 5 minutes, and then it ends roughly. What I did prior to that was that I went online and Google some job search questions, right? What are you most likely to be asked during these process? And I wrote down all these questions, and I actually answered all of these questions. Like, I actually typed out answers to all of these questions. And then my poor friends, some of whom are in this room, I practiced with them. Right. I was like, okay, well, I have this, I only have 20 minutes to tell these people about my research, about my teaching philosophy, about who I am. I have really 20 minutes to sell myself to these people who don't know me out of what they read about me. For me, doing those practices was very useful because all the questions I got were questions that I had already practiced for. Another thing that I did, aside from memorizing all of these things, was also that on my laptop, I had, not physically, but there's an app on my laptop, the yellow sticker app. I don't know if I think we all have it if you have a Mac or something. I had them kind of on my screen with answers on them. So when I was talking to them and I went blank for a second, I would just do a quick glance and then answer their questions, right? But I do know that because I had already practiced these questions, I just felt so comfortable talking to them. So yeah, so practice. Just come prepared in that sense, yeah.
Relatedly, Krista asks if she would love to hear how you organize yourself during the job search in terms of organizing job postings, application materials, and also how you took care of yourself during the process. Okay,
so took care of myself, none. In all honesty, it was such a hectic time. I mean, we're being realistic here, so it was such a hectic time. But in terms of organizing, so I don't know if y'all already aware of like where to find job postings. So how I found job postings were on Interfolio. There's this link called, and I could send it to you, Claudia, and you could probably share it to the participants. But it was Interfolio was, I think it's called academicjobs.com or something. I have the list somewhere. And so I went through all of these websites every day, trying to see if something new has popped up. In addition to that, I was also on the listserv for a lot of associations that I am part of. So if you're in education, which I assume a lot of people here are, be part or join AERA. If you do sociology, join ASA. If you're a Black sociologist, join ABS. All of these things, all of these organizations have listservs where they send job postings, right? And make sure you actually read these emails when you get them. So that's where I was actually getting the job postings from. I also made sure that people knew that I was on the job market. And so when something came across their email, they would just forward those things to me, right? I think those are very important, because if people don't know you're on the job market, or if you don't know where to look for jobs, it's very difficult to then apply for jobs. And so that's what I did. In terms of organizing, I just used Excel sheet. I just opened up an Excel sheet, and I just had a whole list, and I have all these things in a folder that I can just share with whoever is interested. Just let me know, where I just have them listed in terms of what schools there are, what programs, who works there, how my work fits in. I have a column that shows how my work actually fits in to this particular program and what they're looking for. And I also have a column of who I will be asking for letters of recommendation from, depending on what the position was. So that's how my organization is. The last part of the question is how I took care of myself. I again, as I started the question, my answer, I didn't do a great job at taking care of myself, because I was applying for jobs. I was also trying to finish my dissertation. I was also trying to live, so, and I'm pretty sure I was also either TAing or teaching a course. So there was just a lot of things that I was, that I had to do that particular year. So I didn't do a great job at it, but I hope that y'all do better than I did. Yeah.
Thanks for being really honest with that response. In the chat, I see that Maria is asking about the dissertation writing process. She's wondering, what advice can you provide to dissertators who are trying to complete a done dissertation? Was there something that was helpful for you in wrapping up your dissertation and defending it?
Yeah, so getting a job actually was a great push for me to complete my dissertation. So I didn't complete my dissertation. I didn't defend till I think May 22nd of 2019, but I got my job like April 1st or April 5th of 2019, right? No, end of March of 2019. Once I got the job, I knew that I had to graduate, right? So for me, that was really like the strongest push to exit. But I think if you don't have that, right? If you're just like, I just need to finish this, I just need to finish my dissertation, I'm ready to go. One of the things that I would say is just, because speaking for myself, I think, and my assumptions about who's hearing these calls and just graduate students, I think a lot of us are perfectionists. And so we tend to work on things so we feel like it's perfect before we pass it on, right? I would say for your dissertation, just plan it out, right? With your advisor, you have it planned out. You have planned out in terms of how many chapters you're going to have, what the chapters are going to be about, right? And then when you're writing, in terms of, let's say you're writing chapter 1, don't think about the fact that chapter 1 has to be perfect before you move on to chapter 2, right? Just write chapter 1, make sure all your ideas are down, and then move on to the next chapter. One of the things that I found very helpful was that I made sure that within a couple of months of writing my dissertation, at least one chapter was done, right? One chapter was done, and the rest of them, I think I was kind of working on back and forth all throughout my writing session. The reason why I focused on that one particular chapter first is because I felt that that was really the grounding of the entire dissertation. So I wanted to make sure that at least that one was already complete. And then I just went back and forth through the remainders of the chapter. But of course, always coming back to the original chapter to make edits, right? Because nothing is really done till it's done. So just to go back to that question, if you're concerned about really just making sure that your dissertation is done, I would say that don't think about it being a perfect project at that moment. One thing that, and I don't know who told me this, I feel like it's one of the faculties at EPS said that I was having a conversation with somebody and I can't remember who, and they mentioned that because I am going into into tenure track and I knew that I was going to write a book, this project wasn't the end product, right? It wasn't the end. My dissertation wasn't the end. It was going to be something that I was going to pick up when I go into whatever position I'm going to, and then work on it. And it's very true, because if you look at my book manuscript now, you look at my dissertation, it is not the same. And I never understood that when they said, oh, it's going to be two totally different things. I never understood that till I had to work on an actual book manuscript, right? So think about it that way as well. If your goal is tenure track and your goal is a book, the dissertation is not the end. Right? Think of it like, it's the end of graduate school, but it's really a beginning of a larger thing that you want to continue adding on to as you move forward.
And as a follow-up, I see that Krista's asking, was it the findings chapter that you worked on first? Yeah.
Yes. So I had 3 findings chapters in my dissertation, and I worked on my second findings chapters first. And then I worked on the remaining 2, and then I did the rest of them. So I didn't do my introduction was actually the last chapter that I wrote in my dissertation. Yeah.
We also have another question from Gray asking, what are your experiences mentoring students as a professor? Do you have PhD students, and do you enjoy that part of the job?
That is my favorite part of my job. That is my favorite part of my job. Yeah. So the Sociology of Education program here at NYU is a graduate program. So my my graduate students are master's and PhD students. I currently have 3 master's students and 4 PhD students. Last year I had an undergraduate advisee because every year I teach one undergraduate course, and I had an undergrad who wanted me to work as the advisee. So I've had an undergrad advisee, but most of my advisors outside of that all of my advisors outside of that have been PhD graduate students. I love working with graduate students. I think for me it is the best part of the job because you get to actually sit down and talk to people, right? As opposed to when you're writing on your own. When you're doing research, you're doing research on your own, unless you have a research team. But when you're engaging with students, it's always it's great to know that. First, I learn a lot from my students. I learn so much from my students, but it's always great to know that you could be helpful to people in ways that other people were helpful to you. My experiences with my mentor and my advisees, I think, have been great. They say it's great, so I guess it's good. But my approach to mentoring in this so far, because I've only been doing this here for 3 years, but my approach to it has been really letting my students know that I see them as a whole being and not just as students, right? I think that's something that get lost in academia and higher ed. I tell them this, so I don't just assume that they know. When I see them, when I ask them how they're doing, I'm not vaguely just asking how they're doing, right? I'm not just asking that because it's like how you say hello to people. When I ask them how they're doing, I'm interested in really how are you doing. I ask them about not only the work that is due for whatever class they have or for me, but I ask them about their lives. I know so much about my students' lives, right? Because I actually genuinely want to know, because I do know that when something is happening in their lives that is quote unquote outside of school, it really shapes the way that they interact with school and in the work it shapes the way that they interact with the type of work that they're here to do. So I always want to make sure that I'm at least, even if I can't help them, I'm aware of how they're doing as a whole being. So last Friday, I actually had all my students in my home for some food and for some cocktails, so we could like chat and get to know each other. Not get to know each other more than we have to, but I have new students who came in this year, and I wanted to make sure that the older students, in terms of like years being here, were able to kind of give them the type of information that I can give them. Because granted, I have been a graduate student here, it was in 2010, right? So much have changed. My graduate program I was only here for a year and a half, right? So I haven't really been here as a student in the ways that especially my PhD students who will be here as students. So I want to make sure that I'm always connecting them with folks who are already here, who already know NYU as an institution, which is quite large, but also New York City as a city. None of my advisees are from New York, which to me is also an important thing that I take into consideration when I am talking to them about anything. I want to make sure that they understand the city within which they're in. And in doing so, I have to, this is a little bit of more work for me than my colleagues will put in, but I make sure that if they want to know where things are, if I'm available, I'll take them, right? I'm like, oh, you're interested in that particular library because you're looking for this thing that you can't find. Oh, it's on this side. And if they're like, oh, I'm confused, it didn't work, I couldn't find it, I will, like, if I'm free, I will take them, right? So it's a lot of things that I think about in terms of my students, not only being students, but also just being new to the city, being new to such a large institution. Some of them are new to the country. These are all things that I take into consideration when it comes to my approach to my students and how I can make sure that I'm giving them the type of assistance that they need, right? So really just keeping in mind who it is I'm dealing with. Thank you, Gray. I appreciate that question.
Any other questions from folks? Also feel free to open up your mic as well. If not, Mercy, you had mentioned when you were giving your overview that you wanted to tackle funding a little bit. So maybe we can shift gears into talking about that.
Sure. Does anybody have any questions about funding? I'm assuming everybody has funding then. Oh, good for y'all. This is great.
I have a question.
Okay.
I have a question.
Hi, Krista.
Hey. So I think my question is around like how the search for funding or the process of getting funding looks different between graduate school and at the tenure track level. Because I'm just wondering if if there's any differences in either what you're applying for, how you're applying for things, that sort of thing, or even how you search for stuff. Like, are you open to more, is more stuff open to you, so on and so forth?
Yeah, so you mean in this current position and not in grad school, like?
Yeah, versus like because we have like the big things, the Spencer, the Ford, the whoever else. Whereas I'm wondering if there are more opportunities for funding at the tenure track level when it comes to funding your research.
Yeah, so and again, of course, I can only speak for NYU because I don't know the funding system in other universities that well. But in terms of NYU, there's a lot of funding for research here. There's a lot of funding that is, because NYU is such a large institution with different compartments, there's funding within departments, there's funding within the school you're in, and then there's funding in the larger university, right? So I'm in the Department of Applied Statistics, Social Science and Humanities. I'm able to get funding through that. I'm also housed in NYU Steinhardt, and NYU Steinhardt specifically does give a lot of funding, and then which is of course housed in the larger NYU New York University, which also have funding. So in terms of funding opportunities, since I've been here, it hasn't been difficult to get funding to support research, to support just projects that is not particularly research-based, but is still related to my scholarship. And that hasn't been difficult. What has been a little more difficult, and I haven't tackled it that much, has been the external funding, so funding that is not in NYU. That's been a little bit more difficult, but I've only applied to one thing and got rejected. So I haven't tried others much, but in terms of funding within this actual institution, yes, NYU does have quite a lot of funding. I think one of the things that you should also think about if you're interested in going to the tenure track route is that when you do get the offer, when you're going through negotiation, this is also the point where you as the incoming person have to negotiate for research funds for yourself, right? And I know that some schools have a cap of how much money they can give you for your research, but NYU doesn't have a cap, right? So depending on what your research is, you can advocate for any amount of money that you think will make sense for you to do your research, right? So this is money that they give you before you even come into the institution. And then once you're here, you apply for other things. And I would say that some of the fundings are not, the application for some of the fundings is not that difficult. Especially like funding that is more like department based. They really just want like a one-page statement with you telling them what it is you want to use the money for. So it's quite easy that way. Is the external fundings that get a little tricky. But in terms of external funding, so I'm pretty sure every institution have this. There's a office of like research and something. Every school have whatever name they call it. So there is an office within every institution, I think. So for those, for the professors on here, y'all could tell me if I'm wrong or not. But at least NYU has an office of research and productivity or something that when you want to apply for external funding, for example, if I wanted to apply for, let's say, a Spencer, they have somebody who will go through the application with me, who will help me with that application process, which I think is really nice. And I don't know if like we had those opportunities as graduate students outside of your advisor. Like, I don't remember having that outside of like your advisor helping you, right? But NYU has an actual office with people in there who will help you through those things.
Thanks for that. So I think in the interest of time, I'll read out the last two questions I'm seeing here. So Krista, would love if you could explain more about how you negotiated the additional research funds, which is second by Emily. And then we have another quick question from Ariel, who asks about the post-dissertation research. What is it now that you're in the tenure track?
Can you wait? I'm just gonna read Ariel's question real quick.
Yeah.
Not for, could you talk a bit about the post-dissertation research process? Often dissertation research ideas are guided by our advisors. Oh, okay, yes. So my dissertation research was not, like, idea wasn't guided by my advisor, right? And so Lynn is here, and Lynn and I do very different type of work, but still like rooted in the same kind of thoughts. So I didn't have the experience of my my research ideas specifically being guided by my advisor. But I think, well, Ariel, what you're asking is, we had somebody who was helping us through this process, right? Yeah, I see you shaking your head. Great. We had somebody who was helping us through this process, and now we essentially don't have anybody to help you through this process. Well, you're right. You don't have anybody helping you through this process, right? And this is why, I think this is why when you're a graduate student, but you wouldn't know that, of course, till you're done, that while you do have people helping you, like your advisor, like your committee, you really need to know what it is you're doing, right? Especially if you want to go into a job that requires you to continue doing that type of research, right? You need to know what you're doing. Even if you have other people, more advanced people helping you, make sure you understand what it is they're teaching you, right? Make sure you understand what it is they're telling you, why they're telling you to go think about these things this way as opposed to that way, so on and so forth. Now, finishing up and then doing follow-up research. Now, for me, it wasn't difficult because so the first research I did was the follow-up study, and the follow-up study was just interviews, right? It was interviews because it was COVID and I couldn't actually go meet these students face to face, but it was interviews. And I think, and I believe that if you're graduating from EPS, you know how to do interviews by the time you're done, right? So you don't really need to have your you don't need to have other folks kind of helping you through that particular process, right? So for me, it was interviews. My second project was one that was a little more different from what I've done in the past, which was, it was also conducted during COVID. So, and I couldn't go into these schools. So what I did was I incorporated this students journaling as part of my data collection, which I've never done before, right? I've usually always gone into schools and done observations, but this time I was not only interviewing students, but I required that students fill complete journals 2 to 3 times a week for me. And I'll go back in the journals and talk to them within the journals back and forth. For me, that was, again, something very new. And that was a bit difficult because I've never done it before, but it was it's part of the learning, right? And from part of the learning is trying and seeing how it plays out, but also making sure that I also read a lot of studies with folks who actually use that method, right? Just to see how they're using it, why they chose to use it, what kind of research questions they're asking, and therefore choosing to use these particular methods, right? So it really will be the same as if you had other more advanced scholars helping you through it, but you don't have them, right? But this is when you as the scholar have to be more proactive in what you do and what you're attempting to accomplish. Yeah, it's not going to be easy because it was always nice having Lynn to hold me accountable and making sure that I submitted things to her, but now I don't have that, right? So this comes back to this then means that you as the scholar just have to be more proactive, make sure that you have a strict schedule that it's not entirely too flexible, because it's so easy to kind of get caught behind. And then there was the last question. I want to make sure I get to it. Which one was the last question? Oh, negotiation. How you negotiate. I really wish, and I keep calling Lynn's name, poor Lynn. I really wish that graduate schools had some kind of course about negotiation, some kind of workshop about negotiation, really anything about negotiation, because this is my first real job, let's be honest, right? This is my first real adult job. And I had never had to negotiate in this way before. I've had other jobs before, but usually they tell you this, how much you're paying, you're taking or you're leaving, and you're moving on, right? This was the first time I had to actually negotiate. And it was very difficult. It was a very difficult process for me. And luckily I had all my friends, most of them also haven't been through this process, so we were all kind of just learning as we went. But I had them to run it by. NYU does negotiations on the phone, which also makes it so much more intimidating than it would be if you're just emailing people back and forth, right? That's quite easy. But NYU does it on the phone. Maybe other schools do it on the phone. And I think for me, it's recording, so I'm not going to say specific numbers. But if it wasn't, I would have given y'all actual numbers so you could see what the negotiation actually looked like in terms of when we add numbers to the conversation. But my first process, the first step of negotiating was getting a phone call from somebody from the dean's office, and they said, "Hey, we're offering you this for salary, this for research, this for traveling, this for course relief." And I don't know if y'all know what course relief is, but when you get a tenure track position, the first year you get to have at least one course relief, meaning that you're not going to teach. There's one less class you're going to teach. Right, so they gave me that offer. This negotiation, part of the negotiation happened in Toronto because I was at AERA in Toronto in 2019. And so I was in a hotel using the hotel phone because I had no service. And I had a friend of mine, Rosie, who graduated from EPS in May, actually type up the conversation for me because I had it on speaker. So she could type it down for me, right? So when I say it wasn't by only me, it really wasn't. I had other people around me who was helping me with this process. Once that part was done, I took what they told me, went to Lynn and said, "Hey, these are the offers. Does that sound good to you? What does it look like?" She gave me her input. Luckily for me, I also had people from NYU who reached out to me and wanted to talk to me about how I was feeling. And I was very honest with them where I said, "Hey, this is the number they're giving me. Does it sound about right? How much what is the minimum that you think a person like me with my expertise should be taking?" And they were also very honest with me, right? But it all started with me being honest with them. And so through all of that process and going back and forth on the phone with the person from the dean's office, I realized I'm 2 minutes over, so I'm going to fast forward this. With the person at the dean's office, finally came to a number. The thing is, for private schools like NYU, salaries are not available online. Like UW-Madison, you could find a faculty salary. NYU doesn't do that. So you don't really know if you're being lowballed or not, right? Which is a whole different conversation. You really don't know. And a lot of people don't like to talk about money. So as an incoming person who doesn't really know what the money situation looks like, it's really hard to tell. So if you're on this call and you're really interested in what my negotiation process is like, get my email, let's sit down and chat. I will actually share the contract with you so you can kind of see the things that I end up getting from the beginning to the end. Yeah. Because I do want to share that because I think it's very important and I wish I knew more now. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Agyepong, for all your candid responses and for your resources that you're willing to share. Everyone, please join me in thanking me. And thank you all for being present today on a Friday
Thank you.
afternoon.
So many faces that I know, even though their faces are not on. Thank you all for coming. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.